Hello everyone and welcome in today's PECB webinar. My name is Xim and I am the account manager for security portfolio at PECB, also the organizer of this webinar. Today is the first webinar in security portfolio in 2016 and I wish you will enjoy all the webinars that we will launch for this round. For future webinar, we will not take as long as in our past webinars. Our intention is just to be specific on the topics and try to bring the most important part of the topic. Today's webinar will be the thin end of the wedge information security risk assessment based on the ISO 27005 methodology. And this session will be hosted by PECB Trainer, Bevan Lane, who is a director for company InfoSec Consulting. Mr. Lane has more than 16 years of experience as a consultant in information security. He has also experience in information security risk assessment and training and has implemented solutions for major organizations across the globe. I hope this webinar will help you understand the major points of this topic and the importance of the standard. If you have any questions, you can write them in question box in right-hand control panel, or you can use the option to raise your hand and we will answer to all of your questions accordingly. Please, Bevan, you may continue now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, assume afternoon because that's where I am. We've done this presentation a couple of times, and this is a shortened version of the one I did a couple of months ago. But I think we can get through quite a lot of the detail and the context of it by chatting to it in 20 minutes, as we've discussed today. So the thin end of the wedge is about the fact that risk assessments are often, specifically information security risk assessments, are often not taken that seriously, done quickly, given quick deadlines, and we came up with an approach which we thought was something that could be done quickly, but also if you want to spend a considerable amount of time really getting to the core of the problem, allows you to do it. 27005 was an eye-opener for me last year when I started to understand that you could do risk assessments in a far more effective way. So I'm going to show you an approach that we followed at a large company last year, which allowed us to take a lot of approaches and put them into one and come up with what we saw was quite a good methodology. A little bit about me. You've heard all that already, been around for a little while. The methodology that we're going to show you now was done not just by myself, it's a group of us, guys who all had more than 10 years of experience in information security, came up with this approach. So the agenda, let's talk a bit about risk assessments. I'm not going to go into detail about how you do risk assessments and what risk assessments are, those sort of basic things, which I assume most of you know. I'm going to talk more about problems that I've seen in the past with risk assessments and how our approach, a hybrid solution, came up with it. The end results, I'll quickly mention it, but we will go into more detail on the introduction challenge and the hybrid solution. Right, so why the thin edge? And a lot of this was come up by somebody else, one of the other guys on the team. But the thin edge is that little bit in the bottom that is actually probably the most important part. So when you break a big log, you use one of these wedges to do it. The thin edge is the most important part because without it you wouldn't be able to break it. It would just be a square. But often it's given the least attention because it is the thin edge. If we go through the introduction, the risk assessments more and more are becoming vital parts for organizations. And without risk assessments, you can't really do any compliance these days. PCI, ISO 27001, all the major things discuss the fact that if audits, everything relates to the fact that without doing a proper risk assessment, you're going to battle to actually implement this correctly. And I get a lot of requests from clients and from organizations saying to me, well, how do you do security risk assessments? And have you got training on security risk assessments? Because a lot of them haven't really gone through the right approach, and they've come up with it really by using a tool or by tick box exercises with auditors, but they've never really sat down and understood how to do an effective information security risk assessment. The key thing here is integrating into business. The approach that we found, which we like so much, takes it out of the purely technical realm and integrates it nicely into business, and we'll show you how 27005 does that, but also how we use the other approaches. And then the next one is information. So a lot of risk assessments that I've seen at clients focus on doing risk assessments against applications, against PCs, or against the whole business, but they don't really look at information. Now, we all know that this is where everything is heading at the moment, data, big data, all these key matters. Information is everything for us as information security, and it's not about IT, it's about information. So, the issues with information security risk assessments, I've seen a lot of these. Assumptions is one of my favorite words. I think a lot of us in information security, we try very hard not to assume things, but we still do a lot. And a lot of risks and risk assessment methodologies are based on historical information and assumptions that things work in a certain way. As things are changing continuously, these assumptions are being challenged. And I think we need to be careful of a methodology which relies only on assumptions. You've got to have a methodology which uses assumptions to then, but you've got to think with those assumptions. A lot of people don't understand the concepts within information security risk assessments. A lot of people don't understand vulnerabilities. A lot of people don't understand what a threat, the difference between a threat and a risk is. And a lot of those are things that people need more education on. They're based on your knowledge. So you may have somebody in the company who's really, really good at what he does and has a lot of experience and knows a lot of these threats. And then you might have somebody that knows very little, and it relies on the superstar in the company to tell you these things. If you don't get somebody good in your risk assessments, you can often not come up with the risks. This fourth one, when we did this exercise the first time at a big gas company, they asked us to do this in 6 weeks. And it was very much a tick box. They wanted to then go into controls, and they wanted just to show somebody they had done a risk assessment. We had a long discussion with them, and we said, guys, if you want to do this properly, it's going to take far more than 6 weeks when you explain how big the company was. And they ended up giving us 5 months to do this exercise, which is why, in our mind, it was far more effective. Often the reports are just used to show consultants or auditors not really implemented correctly, and not really, the value is not taken from them. And the focus. So I'm going to show you another slide just now where we talk about the different focuses. But a lot of people couldn't see how looking at information is a right. They wanted to go into a very detailed technical level, and other people then look at it only at an organization level. But they don't necessarily understand the value of the 3 different levels, which ties in with this one. So from the NIST SP 800 standard, there's a very nice pyramid which explains the different types of risk assessments. And we use this slide a lot because you'll find that people are either looking at it at enterprise level or at things like IT systems. So SAP, sometimes they're looking at Microsoft Windows or the firewall, but they don't look at business processes enough, we found. I do know some companies that do this, but most of my clients very rarely look at business processes and the information within them. And 27005 is very strong on that. It tells you about how, in order to actually get to the core risks, you need to understand what information you're trying to protect, and you get that from the business processes. And you can see it as very much aligned with business, instead of a couple of techie guys sitting in and coming up with risks to the firewall. There's a lot more detail. But all 3 of these levels have their benefits, and if you're going to do it effectively, I would suggest that you do all 3 of these levels, starting at the enterprise, but then getting into more detail on the business processes, and then looking at specific information systems after that. And you'll see that's the difference between strategic and tactical risk. So it ties in with what I said earlier. You know, things are changing so quickly right now, and if you're just using a simple risk assessment methodology which looks at an enterprise and says, have we had this issue before? No, therefore the likelihood of it happening is very small. These are issues that you must be a little bit more intelligent about when you do risk assessments. The likelihood of a major issue happening has often been shown to be a problem when you say it's a 1 and next year something big changes. So you've got to think, you've got to forecast into the future if you're going to try and do effective risk assessments. So this is the different things we used for our methodology, and you'll see 27005 was the first one we saw, but we couldn't come up with an effective way of measuring using 27005 just with the standard. We then found a tool which was created by the Software Engineering Institute, the Carnegie Mellon, Octave Allegra. Allegra is a quicker way of using the old version of Octave, so it came out a couple of years ago. But we found that Octave was very manual, and we could align it very nicely with 27005, but it was all about pieces of paper and questionnaires and long interviews and getting people to do things by themselves where they didn't really understand a lot of the concepts. So we then looked at NIST, and we thought, how can we implement some of the NIST standards? Obviously, there's a lot of NIST standards, but we're looking, excuse me. Then ISO 31000, of course, about risk assessments, a lot of value to that. But we also had a lot of questions from the business, because it was a oil and mining company, about how we could integrate this into specifically ICS systems. So there were a lot of challenging questions, and we spent a month at the beginning of the exercise doing it and coming up with better approaches. So speaking to the business, starting the process and realizing we need to change it. And this whole approach for this came up as we did the risk assessment, and as we found problems, then we dealt with the problems. So going forward, I've done this exercise now, 5 or 6 other clients where we now have an established methodology. But the first client was incredibly interesting, because we had to come up with a lot of questions, and a lot of people there were a lot of experience and had to change a lot of the way they thought in the past. So we came up with a hybrid solution by using the things we showed you previously in the slide above, and this is where our solution came, and I'll show you on the next slides what that means. But really, we came up. We want to keep developing this methodology, and we probably will use. We spoke about that earlier, so it's understanding what the impact and the likelihood is. We spoke earlier about things like likelihood are affected by historical information, so we did do an historically based assessment in most cases. We've been doing it, but then we try and work out based on current trends whether we should modify it and the business they're in, the environment that they're in. And at the end, you come up with a risk score, and then after that, obviously, as control recommendations and results are documented. So you'll see every one of these has an input and output that we got the information from. We then came up with different types of reports, and we sat down with the business and said, this is what we find within your business, and this is what we recommend going forward. A lot of these control recommendations can be done by IT. So IT can implement a lot of them, but in many cases, you'll find that they need to do some stuff with their people as well. They need to do more with applications that maybe can't necessarily be dealt with by IT. So we take the IT-specific controls, we give it to IT, and then we look at the business, and we say, these are the ones that are specific to you. And then they're documented. And this exercise is obviously a continuous exercise. You can see that, but you won't need to necessarily do much work on the system characterization except to see what's changed if you come back in a year or two. A lot of people I've spoken to are amazed by how much we got done in quite a short period of time, but because there is a lot to get, and it can take a very long time for some big companies to do this. For a small and medium-sized company, you can do this relatively quickly, and there's quite a lot of value by making sure that you get the critical assets documented. And then you can align it to the other two types, the specific one and the detailed organizational one. All right, so that's a bit more of a simplified one. So if you were to do this in your environment or at another client, you'd decide, what is the existing risk framework that my client has or the organization has, and how can I align this with it? We did this in quite a detail. We didn't want to bring up our own approach, so we went and had a look at the organization's one and saw how much detail they had put into doing it at an organization level, but how there was very little for us in terms of information security. So we then conducted the assessment, and you'll see it's about the threat source and events. They were all done in workshops with the client, and of course very important to validate the information with the business. And make sure that the values that they've got have been checked by senior management, because sometimes there's a bit of emotion involved. Sometimes there's somebody that maybe didn't understand this incorrectly. So the double checking of this is incredibly important, and the communication of the results and the continuous assessments of this. Okay, so at the end of the day, you get a risk rating, which has been through multiple levels, being looked at by, in our case, it was a very strong team of people, but also by the business to validate what you saw. And there's a lot of explanation. You'll see the beginning stuff on the preparation. I can't overestimate how important it is to do the preparation correctly. And this is where the problem comes in, because the client wants this done in a week. And you can't really do preparation until you understand things correctly. And you need to be speaking to people, need to understand the size of the business, the scope of the business, what their business objectives are, and trying to get an understanding overall of what environment they're in. Preparation is key. And that's where we failed in the first couple of clients that we've done this. We didn't do enough preparation, and we had to go back and do a bit more later. After that, we've learned how to do that better. All right, I think I was exactly on 20 minutes. I was trying to keep to the timeline, so I think a little bit less than 20 minutes, so there's enough time for questions. So if there are any questions, obviously we can take it from there.
Yeah, Bevan, we have a question. I will read and you will be able to answer. The first question is, how could this be used for third-party vendors for Fortune 50 companies?
Sure, that's an interesting question. Okay, so for third-party vendors, you often do it at a specific level for what services they offer you. So you would take the service that they offer you and you would then feed it into that. So what business processes are being offered by a third-party vendor, and then those business processes would then be evaluated through the ranges of the threats and vulnerabilities, and what controls they've got in place. Hope that answers it.
Yeah, I think it's good. The second question is, having all the necessary information, is it an assurance that we are going to make an outstanding risk assessment?
The more information, the more relevant information you've got, the better. You're right, sometimes you get too much information which actually doesn't add too much value, because you know about minor business processes, or you're listening to someone's opinion on something which maybe isn't relevant in this case. But getting the relevant information is very important. So getting as much information as you can allows you then to understand the business well, and to be able to understand the threats to that business. It doesn't guarantee it ever, but it helps you a lot. You then go experience and relevant information together are two very important things for this.
Okay, another question is, what are your thoughts on SOC reports?
Very important. It's something that you can feed into this. Once you get the initial information, you're looking at it in terms of controls, how effective are those reports, and you can align it quite well.
Okay, we have one person who have raised his hand, and he wants to make his question by himself. So I will unmute his mic and he will be able to talk to you.
All right,
okay, Mr. Abu Mansour, you are able to make a question now. Mr. Abu Mansour? I think he is having trouble with his mic. Yeah. So we have another person. No, actually he's having problem with the mic. Actually, we have no more question, and we thank you, Bevan, for this highly informative presentation. I believe the attendees had a chance to learn new things today, and I suggest you to take time and see our future webinar that we will be hosting next Wednesday. We will host a webinar topic which is called Top Management Role to Implement ISO 27001. Thank you once again to all the attendees, and thank you, Bevan, for the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.